I didn't know how the sermon was going to start until 5 minutes ago, and then it clicked. Because it happened 3 times since we've been here together, and I'm not sure if you picked up on it. I think the older you get, the more you want to deny how old you are. Right? When we were doing birthdays, somebody's like, oh, it's my 39th birthday, but I've celebrated it, 40 times or whatever you said. Why do we do that? That for me is an interesting question. I need to ponder, I need to percolate it. If you did that, don't worry. Lots of people do that. I think it's an interesting reflection on our hesitancy around getting older. So we've been doing, this is the week number 4 of Sermon by Requests, and the topic for today is aging. So I want to dive into this topic, and let's see where we get. Now, the obvious thing to say at the beginning of a sermon like this is, I'm 29, and so I have a little bit less experience aging than many of you. I also know that this sermon is woefully incomplete. As I was running through it, I realized, well, I'd forgotten a whole section on lament. Because I think lament is part of getting older, lamenting what you cannot do anymore, lamenting lost relationships. And then I realized I missed a whole section on wisdom, which the kids pointed out, and I'll need to go back and think through that. So what we have is incomplete, and may there be conversation about that. I saw this graph once. It was a graph of the weeks in your life. It's a little hard to see maybe from the back, but there's a box for every week in your life. And so this graph goes as long until you're 90 years old. There's a box for every week in your life, which is a little hard to grasp, kind of blank boxes. But this is what the boxes look in kind of roughly colored. So the little blue section at the top, those are your early years, until you're 5.5. You don't remember a lot from that time, but every week you live, you're checking off one of those boxes. The green sections are your elementary and middle school years. The yellow one, high school. The orange one, college. And in Canada, I think that's much more, I think it's a bigger block actually, because it only goes to about 22. And then that big red block in the center is your career. Goes in this graph, I think, till about your 63. And then the chunk at the end is your retirement, that big purple chunk. Now, some people you know may have not made it all the way through that. Their life may have ended sooner than that. The little blue dot in that purple chunk is the average life expectancy of a man, and the red one is the average life expectancy, right there, that's of a woman. So if you make it to 90, you're exceeding your peers. But every week you live, you're checking another box off that graph, and for me that's a really interesting notion. Like I said to the kids, we only ever get older. We are only ever getting older. But I think when we think of aging, it's this purple box right at the bottom that we find our most concern with. It's the section of our lives that many of you are living in right now. But I think the lessons that we can learn about aging are not just applicable to people 65 and older. So, I want to start first with chickens. Naturally. So, a chicken in our industrial food system lives somewhere between 1 year and 3 years. And during that time, the chicken is supposed to lay as many eggs as possible. And when the chicken no longer is productive in egg laying, then the chicken is offed. It's butchered for chicken noodle soup or whatever it's made into. But chickens can live as long as 16 years. But we only see them as valuable when they're egg laying. Even though, as they get older, they will still lay eggs, just not quite as many. because we place an incredible amount of value on productivity. Your value is often seen as a producer and a consumer. So as long as you're producing something and as long as you are consuming something, you are worthwhile. But I think that's a very dangerous thing to think. Because when you get older, well, you don't or can't even produce as much. There's this saying that has been introduced to me in the last month or so. The idea that we are human beings, not human doings. Which sounds trite, and maybe it is, but I think there's value in remembering that. So I want to talk about Sabbath. There's this commandment that is rooted in the earliest stories of the scripture. It begins in the Genesis 1 account. And in the Genesis 1 account, God creates this massive system of planets and cosmos and molecules, and then on day 7, God rests. And this becomes the impetus for this commandment in the story of Exodus. Remember the Sabbath and keep it holy. So I've been thinking a lot about Sabbath recently. I've been reading this book by Walter Brueggemann, an Old Testament scholar, and he would say that Sabbath is an act of resistance. Because we're told you must produce and consume. And if you're not doing one of those two things, then there is no value in you. But not when it comes to Sabbath. And what he says about Sabbath is really brilliant. Sabbath is not the completion of all your tasks for the week so that you just take a day off. No, there will always be work to do. And when you take a day off, you recognize that your life's worth and value is not tied up in what you can do and produce. It's tied up in the fact that you are and God is. And that same week-to-week Sabbath ritual, I think, applies to us as we get older. How many of you, when you die, will have completed all the work you wanted to do? If you have, let me know. I want to know your secret. There will be mountains of things left undone, things you've always wanted to do that will be left undone. But if you spend your entire years as you get older worrying about the things left undone, I have a feeling aging will become an angsty time in your life. You'll want to say, I'm 39 with 40 years experience. Because as we age, our capacity declines or reduces, and our reliance on other people increases. So, when you first retire, suppose that time comes for you, you'll be able to get up in the morning, you'll be able to mow the lawn, you'll be able to bake some cookies and go to the theater, all within the span of a day, and it'll be great. And a few years later, you won't be able to do all of that. You might be able to mow the lawn, but that will be enough for the day. You might be able to bake the cookies, but that's all. Or you may be able to go to the theater, but you're going to go to the matinee because you don't want to drive home in the dark. You're laughing because you know it's true. But then it gets even more severe, doesn't it? Right? As you get older, there will come a time when you cannot get out of a chair without help. And there will come a time, maybe for you, where somebody will cut your food for you because you're no longer able to do that for yourself. And there will come a time when somebody else maybe needs to wipe you after you've used the washer. And so your capacity to do much of anything reduces. And in order to continue living, you will depend on others for your very survival. We don't particularly like that loss of control. But there is the possibility that in that loss of control, we relinquish it to God, and we relinquish it to our community that surrounds us. And that in the community that surrounds us, we might actually see expressions of the divine in the people who care for us. And the people who are doing the caring, they might find God in us because we are better at being. But implicit in this whole topic of aging is the question, are you ready for death? So I want you to think of your family and friends who surround you. Are you ready to say goodbye to them? Like, not the kind of goodbye like I'm going on a trip, I'll see you in a week. But the kind of goodbye, it was so good living with you. And think of all the things you own. The cars and the rooms full of stuff and the photo albums. Are you ready to say goodbye to all of that? Not in, I'm going to put you in a storage locker and see you sometime later, but no, thanks for accompanying me on the journey. I want you to find your breath for a second. Breathe deeply in and out. As you have lived, if you live to the age of 80, those lungs of yours will have breathed 650 million times. But then there will come a day when those lungs of yours, they will take one last breath. And find your pulse, if you will. Your neck or your wrist, wherever is most comfortable. And that pulse of yours, that wonderful organ is known as your heart. It will beat, if you're 80, but 3.3 billion times. But then one day, it will stop, and it will beat no more. Are you ready for that moment? I don't know what lies on the other side of that moment of death. I think about it a lot. There's lots of images and metaphors that seem to apply, but I don't know. The image that comforts me the most is that we will melt into the love of God. I hope that's true. So aging, I don't know what we do with it, but here's the things I think I do know. We start by remembering that our value as human beings does not reside in our productivity, but it resides in our ability to simply be. And that as we get older and as we lose our faculties, that we rely on one another and develop trust with one another. And in that, we will see God. And there will come a moment when we die, when our heart stops beating and our lungs stop breathing, and we lose all control. We transition into a place that we do not know, but where we trust in the mystery and in the beauty and in the love of God. We can certainly go into it angsty, uncomfortable, and raging, or we can go in it with a deep sense of peace and connection rooted in the divine. Amen.